I'm someone who's not that passionate about actual film and getting the process of film developed, so I decided to buy the cheapest and best looking Fuji film camera and make the images look like film in Lightroom. Through my 5-week trip across America, I captured photos on my Fuji X10 and edited them whilst I was out there on my iPad. The most important thing about this process is that the photos need to be raw images straight out of the camera, because they need to have as much information as possible to edit them as much as we're about to do. I edit all my X10 photos on my iPad. This iPad in particular is the iPad Air with the M1 chip, and I just find it so immersive with the tone curve. The tone curve is probably the most important thing into achieving the film simulation look. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I have this first image, a picture I took in LA, and this is the original, and this is what we're going to turn it into. So what you want to do is go onto the light tab and go onto your tone curves. And what you want to do here is create an S-curve. You really want to add contrast to the image because it's very flat. After you've done this, you want to go onto the next tab on the red and do exactly the same thing. Be mindful of, obviously it is changing color, so just have that vintage look idea in your head while doing it. Again, we can go back and change this after anyway. You just really want to do some minimal tone curve, just to really kind of change the color of what the highlights and the shadows are doing. But on this blue tab, it's still fairly blue, so just want to bring this down a little bit to make it slightly more green, and same with the shadows. There, you can see what a difference that's already made. If we just go back to the original, you can see what a difference that has already made, and we've literally only done the tone curves. So you want to go back in. After this, go back onto the highlight and shadows, and you really want to bring this shadow one up here because you want the shadows to be very faded. That's what makes film look film, and it is just kind of the blown out shadows whilst the highlights are still popping. You kind of adjust this however you want. So after you've done this and you're happy with the tone curves but you still think it's a little bit bright or dark, you can just go onto exposure over here and just kind of like move that as you please, make that slightly brighter, or literally make that bright or dark. And obviously doesn't need to be massive changes, just a little bit. You can kind of add a little bit of contrast, dial down the highlights a little bit so it goes off the side of the building, up the shadows a tiny bit, play with the whites. And once you're happy with that, you can go over to color, and this is where the image really comes to life, is this temp tab here. You can either do cold or warm. You really want to drag this over to the warm side because that's what gives it that really nice orangey vintage look. And if you're thinking, oh, that's still a little bit too orange, go back onto the tone curvatures. You can actually make this a little bit more detailed, so you can really drag the shadows into the greens a tiny bit. If you go into the green tab, you bring that down a little bit. Again, it's really the combination between the tone curves that you can really achieve this really nice look. If you don't want the shadows to be as green, you can just bring this down here and it kind of flattens out a little bit. Again, it's looking a little bit too contrasty at the minute, so what I'm going to do is go back onto the vibrance tab and just dial that down a tiny bit. Even bring the saturation up a tiny bit as well. It's looking fairly pink, so again, you want to go back over here, go onto your red tab, just dial them down a tiny bit. Again, it's really about just having a playing with the tone curve, seeing what combinations work, but that is looking pretty good to me. Again, you want to kind of dial down that pink a little bit. And after you're done, and after you're happy with the colors you've selected, you can go over to effects, and obviously the most important ingredient is the grain. You want to bring that, the sweet spot for me is normally between 50 and 60. You'll bring that up like that, like so. You can even zoom in as well, so you can actually have a little look at how much you're doing. Like so. Like that. I'm pretty happy with that. I still think it can add a little bit more orange in there. It'll probably die down some of the tabs there. Really make that green and pink show. Yeah, I'm very happy with that. And that didn't take that long at all. So we look at the difference between the original and our edit that we've just done. Now, if we move on to the next example, this one I took in New York. Again, probably one of the my most favorite places I've ever been. We'll go over to the tone curve. We really want to just make that contrasty image. Again, not worrying about anything else, just really want to add contrast to the flat image. Now this one in particular we're going to have some fun with, because we actually want the shadow area to appear, to really show, and there's a lot of highlighted sections going on here, so we do really need to be careful of that. So this one we will actually probably not go with the highlights as much. Bring up the highlights and bring up the shadow, sorry, slightly more, like so. We go over to the next tab, do the same again. A red and green combination always looks filmic and vibey anyway, so that's why this makes such a difference when we're just going through the tone curves. Bring that down a tiny bit. Yeah, a little bit more orange, like so. Like that. Super happy with that. Again, if you don't want to fiddle around with the tone curve, you can just go into exposure here and then make that add as you please. Probably don't need too much of that. We probably up the shadows a little bit because we really want this to show here. Die down the highlights a little bit. Add the whites. Die down the blacks a tiny bit. Again, we'll go into the tone curve and we'll bring up the shadows so it's not as... really want those blacks to look faded. Like so. Yeah. Already that's looking super awesome. So we go over to color again, just change the temp a tiny bit, make that a little bit more orange. Go over to effects. Can actually probably play with the dehaze tab on this one as well, make that a little bit less sharp. A little bit less sharp, sorry. And we go down to grain again. 50 to 60 is a good sweet spot. Size, and we'll up the roughness a little bit as well, like that. Now I'm pretty happy with that so far. There's not too much that we need to do. Maybe just die down the highlights a little bit, bring down the shadows. And I think that is about right. If we just look at the difference between the original and then the current edit, makes such a difference. This one was also taken in New York. This one is a personal favorite because there's so much going on. It really shows off the busyness of New York. This is what the picture looks like before, and this is what it looks like afterwards. So again, you just want to go into the tone curves. You want to bring up and create that S curvature. There's a lot of light in this one, so we can really bring down and add contrast with the shadows, like so. Do the same again over here. Already this is really coming to life, and we've barely even touched it. Bring that down a little bit more, not as much, like so. Really want to kind of get rid of that bluey look, and we really want to bring that down into the greens, like so. Go back over to the highlight and shadow, and we really want to bring down the shadows, and then bring up the fadedness of the blacks, like so, up here, like that. And we actually just add a little bit of orange into this image, like so. Again, the best thing about film, it doesn't need to look crisp, and like even the highlights and shadows here, like you really want that big contrast between them, because that's essentially what makes up film anyway. You can even just add take out a little bit of vibrance out of that, because there's a lot going on. And again, not forgetting the most important step is adding grain. We'll do about 50 to 60. You can even zoom in as well to see what we're working with, like so. And there we are. Probably a little bit on the dull side at the minute. So if we just add a little bit of green. just a tiny bit. Again, probably add a little more pink in that as well, like so. Probably dye down the highlights a tiny bit. Not completely killing them. And that looks about right for a quick little edit. If you show before and after, you can see a really flat image and then a super nice contrasty filmic look. There are my 3 examples. If you did enjoy this video, then I will do more photo editing tutorials of how film simulation works and how I do my own film simulation. Hopefully that's cleared up a few things from the previous Fuji film video, and you've learned something from this and you can take away and edit your own pictures. I do have loads of presets that make my life a lot easier when I do this, but that I've spent ages doing, and they apply to a variety of different situations and different lightings. As you can see, blue sky, red, natural, bright sunshine, low shadows, inside flash. And if you are interested in seeing a bit more about that, then please let me know in the comments. Hope you've enjoyed the video and you've learned something about film simulation and you can apply it to your own photos. And I will see you soon.